All right, we're going to call the meeting, the Joint Council and URA Board Joint Work Session to order. And before we do public comments, I thought maybe since we have two bodies here, that maybe we could do some introductions. And we'll start with
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm Hui Radomski. I'm the South Coast Regional Representative with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Thank you.
And I'm Chelsea Schnabel, the City of Coos Bay's Community Development Director.
I'm Jill Rolfe, Coos County's Community Development Director.
Drew Farmer, Coos County Commissioner.
John Sweet, Coos County Commissioner.
Rod Taylor, Coos County Commissioner.
Jacob
Nubergall, Coos Bay City Councilor.
Nicole Rutherford, City Manager at Coos Bay.
Nathan McClintock, City Attorney.
Christina Texera, Grant Coordinator, City of Coos Bay.
and online,
Joe Benetti, Mayor of Coos Bay.
Joe, Mayor Benetti.
And Carmen Matthews here, City of Coos Bay.
Okay, and online, we can't hear you. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay.
You can't
We have
hear
Mayor
us?
Benetti online and Councilor Carmen Matthews online. And our next item on the agenda is the public comment period. Do we have anyone that would like to make public comments? Well, he's coming up. Can you do a test for us, Mayor Benetti?
Can you hear me? Darn.
Okay,
I can hear
go
you.
ahead, Mike.
Okay. Good evening, Mike Powell from Main Street, Coos Bay, Empire area. And just a little thing tonight, sort of going to do a YouTube free. I just watch certain ones on there, and I want to share with you guys what I find very inspirational. And some of these guys coming up with some good stuff. And I've given you a list of the YouTube channels I watch at night. And they all seem pretty good, right in line with thinking. And so I gave a little sheet out for anybody. If you want to go home and look at your computers and check it out one or two times, they come up with some good ones, show a lot of global improvement. Like Ray Delahanty, he used to be a city planner, I think, in Portland. And he's got a channel called City Nerd. And he discusses a lot about, what's going on in cities. And then not just bikes, he's a Canadian that moved to the Netherlands, and he's done tremendous work on that. And the third one is an organization called Strong Towns, which have been around a little while, and they, like I said, they've all voted. So that's my, just wanted to share that with you guys in case you guys want to have a little look on your TV, something, whatever. Thank you.
And did you,
Yep.
did you share a copy of this with the city manager?
I'm not sure. Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure so that the other counselors online can.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further public comments? Dee?
Thank you, guys. Dee Lundy, Rabbi Rouser from the Empire district there. Last time I was here, I thought, well, they're gonna think I'm crazy about tearing down the overhead freeways and ripping up the railroad tracks, and instead of turning our back on this fabulous river, actually, it's not that crazy, because that guy, not just bikes that you have that link to, they have examples of South Korea had a freeway that we talked them into. Over the city, it was horrible underneath there. They have pictures of it. They tore it down and built a stream down through the middle of town. I go, well, I'm not that, well, I might be, but anyway. Car-centric, cars, there's tons of cars. Every single example that I've looked at where they've reduced a lane of traffic and slowed the city down and opened it up to public use has just made a city blossom. And I think tourism is where, for economic development, I think this is tourism. A major tourism, art, city So anyway, that's my coffee cup idea.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dean. Do we have any other public comments? No written comments that came in or anything?
No one is on this.
Just those two gentlemen who were at the podium there. Thank you very much. All right, our next item on the agenda is the review of upcoming city council and URA board action items, which is the city of Coos Bay and Coos County shared urban growth boundary work. And Chelsea, you want to give us kind of an overview?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. So thank you, County Board of Commissioners, for joining us here, city councilors and mayor. This is the urban growth boundary. We're looking at the urban growth boundary. It's something that we talked about months ago, maybe a year ago, right? We have agreements in place that talk about how the city and the county manage their urban growth areas. It doesn't fit within today's rules and law about urban growth boundary amendments. So working with the state Department of Land Conservation and Development, we've got a pathway forward for how we're going to clean up these the agreements in these areas and get to where both the city and the county have agreed they want to be. So consultant CSA Planning, Jay Harland, has been working on this with us. We've had 4 public advisory committee meetings to date to talk about the areas, the research that's been done, and effectively what this process does is it needs to go through a regional problem solving process, and this work to date is getting us to a point where we all agree on what goes into that agreement that sets this kind of the scope of work, the pathway forward. So that's kind of where we're at in the process. Jay will talk to you about regional problem solving, like the problem solving statement, and wanting to gain input, trying to gain feedback and input on the goals that'll go into this and the areas that we want to look at. Do we want to look at one area for UGB evaluation? Do we want to look at them all? Do we want to do some as evaluating for inclusion in the UGB versus some evaluating as urban reserves? There's some differences in how you treat those. So that's really kind of a very brief summary. The goal, though, being to clean up our existing agreements, those urban growth areas, to align with how things are today and to prepare for the future. We know that we've got the potential for some large projects to come into place. We want to be ahead of the game when it comes to housing and development. So that's kind of part of the impetus. Jill, did you want to add anything? Okay, so tonight, Jay, our consultant, is going to come up. He has a presentation. I assume it's been.
In theory.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we had a joint City County Planning Commission meeting on the 13th. So just about 2 weeks ago, they heard the same information. And after that, they concurred, have a consensus that they would recommend to these bodies that we would move forward considering the Charleston Barview area and the Bunker Hill Bay Park areas for UGB evaluation. And then the other areas, Libby, Millington, Blossom Gulch, and then there's an RR2 opportunity area. We would evaluate those for urban reserve. And so there would be 2 different buckets, they'd be treated differently. So just letting you know that was their recommendation, how we should proceed. And Jay, if you want to add any more while we're waiting.
No, I think that's right. I think a couple things I'd like to say is, one, I'd just really like to thank the members of the project advisory committee. They asked a lot of good questions, and attendance was pretty good throughout, and these sort of things aren't the most glamorous sorts of activities to request somebody to come and sit in on, and it's always a testament to small towns. It seems like people always step up and, want help and want their community to be a better place. And that was definitely the environment. So I just want to thank them for that. And also thank all the planning commissioners that showed up for the joint work session. They asked some really good questions. And they were 100% tracking. So that's for something as complicated as this, like I would say it's pretty impressive and just a really good group. So
Is this your?
that's not mine.
Two, yes, comprehensive land use plan, go 14 should have enough land for that land.
And the other thing I would say too is it sounds like the people online.
Yeah, we're working on that.
Yeah, are muted, but the mayor did participate in the project advice, so he already had his chance to put me through my paces for, an hour and a half at that meeting. So I'm sure if they get it fixed again, though, he'll have a couple more things he wants to weigh in on.
Seriously. This is like the meeting, the firestorm. Do you have it loaded on yours?
Well, I can definitely say that I am of no help with electronics today. I went into work and my computer wouldn't even come on, so. I know.
I'm saying it's not as much fun as when the engineers can't get it to work. That's
I know, right?
you have a degree in that. You can't get the thing to do what you want it to do.
Laptop lost internet 2 or 3 times before 10 this morning.
Oh. Yeah, I didn't have internet either.
Mine stopped registering that it even has a port.
There we go.
That's not good. Your computer is not yours.
You have no ports, it's not a good sign.
You just forgot it has an Ethernet port with a cord in it.
Well, this is a good sign because the next step for me was singing and that's always a bad thing.
I could run home and get a guitar table.
Oh, shh, don't tell me.
How many do you have?
Only one. Can't play it, so I got it.
Tap dance.
There he is.
All right.
Excellent.
Get the Bill Max next year.
The floor is yours.
Catch an inspiration and then, you're off.
Thank you, Counselor. So we did introduction staff and council. My name is Jay Harlan with CSA Planning, and like I said, I'm the consultant for the project. Your packet, I realized, was sort of heavy. I don't necessarily expect everyone to have read every single word, unless you had a real bout of insomnia and need to get put to sleep. But I'm not going to go through all that stuff sort of line by line, but I just want to kind of give an overview of the 3 pieces. The tech number 3 has kind of a bunch of maps in it. That's that one we were looking at what are the areas we're talking about, what's going on with those areas, how developed are they currently, what's the zoning in those areas and things like that. So it's a kind of a high level flyover of looking at that from the perspective of what's called goal 14, which is the urbanization goal for the state. And then the 4th tech memo, that's on that, we really kind of dug into the foundation for an RPS project. So regional problem solving, the process is essentially, no matter what, it's the county and then any number of other participants depending on the nature of the problem, right? So there's only been one other of these done in the state. That one had Jackson County, where I live, and 6 participants. Well, Jacksonville, and then they pulled the ripcord and bailed on the other 6 cities about 2 months before it was supposed to really start. But at any rate, the regional problem solving statute requires that the county and then the participating jurisdictions all sign on to an agreement to essentially do the planning work. That's the way that it works. So first the city and the county do their thing, then you send it up to the state reviews the agreement and also the information that goes with it to decide whether or not they want to, essentially allow the jurisdictions to do the regional problem solving project. What does regional problem solving do? It lets you essentially you can flex some of the rules. Now, the outcomes still need to comply with the goals on whole, the statewide planning goals, and you have to comply with all the statutes. So you don't need to flex statutes because that's the law. And the goals are the in Coos Bay area, it's the 14 statewide planning goals that apply everywhere in Oregon, plus goal 16, which is the estuary area, which I think you're all familiar with some of the estuary planning that has come before you. So, so that's the tech number 4 really gets into the details of sort of what's unique about the situation in Coos Bay as it relates to the current configuration of the urban growth boundary and the land uses that are around the city of Coos Bay. That's really what tech memo 4 does. And then tech memo 5 is a draft RPS work plan. So if the county and the city are in agreement to initiate an RPS project, you reach agreement, it goes to the state says, yep, looks good, go ahead and do it. This is CSA sort of draft of, okay, these are the things that you need that would be involved with implementing that agreement to get to the outcomes that are set forth in the agreement. So the draft problem statement that's in tech memo 3, and there's essentially 4 basic problems. One is a population problem, which is in most of the communities around the state, areas like Barview and Charleston and Bunker Hill, when the original UGBs were set up, those areas were included in urban growth boundaries. And Coos County and Coos Bay sort of did it and sort of didn't do it. And then later on in kind of the late 90s and early 2000s, both the city and the county then took very specific actions that said, no, we didn't do that. They're not in the urban growth boundary. So for the rest of the state, sort of as the state's land use planning program has evolved, the general assumption is these areas are already in UGBs. Then if you want to add more land to your UGB, it's going to be based upon a population forecast where generally you have growth that it's forecast, and then you analyze the growth that the Portland State University Population Research Center forecasts for that UGB. And there's nothing really in the way that's done that accounts for transferring the population, right? So depending on what areas might be within an RPS project and ultimately get included in the UGB, when we looked at the Charleston and Barview and Bunker Hill areas, like, and then some of those other areas, like it's like 6,500 people, I think, ish, in round numbers, I think. So there's just not a process to go, okay, what if these people are outside the UGB now and inside the UGB later? They go from the county's population rural forecast to the city's forecast, but there wasn't really growth. It was just moving the line on the map and changing the accounting, right? So there's just sort of nothing in the population forecast process that captures that. So that translates then into the land need problem, which is under the normal UGB process. The land need problem is based upon, the land need is based upon the sort of the amount of population that cannot be accommodated for employment and for housing within the UGB. So that's the standard process. But again, there's really no process for, well, what if that land is already developed to substantially urban densities already? And really what you're doing is transferring areas that are considered urban under the statewide planning goals from outside the UGB into the UGB. It's kind of the same problem. And then the last one is the boundary location problem, which is the standard process. It is, you have a population forecast, you do the land need, you don't have enough, the city doesn't have enough land in their UGB, so they need to do a UGB amendment to include those lands to meet that need. So the standard process, then actually what you're doing is trying to identify lands that have buildable land to meet that land need that was identified. Again, there's no real process for, well, what if that land's already urban and significantly built out already, which doesn't, in most instances, I mean, I think there is some developable land potential in these areas, but it's not like, a vacant flat 200 acres kind of arrangement, right? It's like there's, I think some of the densities of these areas are north of 2 units to the acre already, which is a relatively urban density. And then the last economic problem the last problem really pertains to commercial development, because those areas are designated as in Charleston, Barview, and Millington, or Charleston, Barview, and Bunker Hill. The commercial areas in those areas are under what's called the unincorporated communities rule, which restricts the size, and Millington is a rural community under that rule, and it restricts the amount of commercial development that you're allowed to do. Essentially, you can't do new commercial development in excess of 8,000 square feet of building in Charleston, Barview, and Bunker Hill, and then in Millington, you're limited to 6,000 square feet, which if you have a lot of experience with commercial, like a 6,000 square foot commercial building is not a very big building. Industrial, there aren't those limitations. There are in the rule, but later the legislature decided we don't really like those limitations. So any land that was designated industrial originally can be as big as it wants. And that was something that the legislature passed. So those are the four basic problems. So there's kind of five policy options that we presented to the Planning Commission. Chelsea already mentioned what their direction was, and really to sort of finish the project for the consultants' work so that you guys can decide officially whether to go forward or not. We're asking for further direction from the board and the council because that's ultimately your guys' decision, right? So the first one is to maintain the existing regulations. That's always an option, right? There's always the option, just do nothing. You know, it may not be working well, but we can, there's nothing that is requiring, there's not a state law that says, you know, the city of Coos Bay or Coos County has to do this, right? So there's always the option to do that. I'm sure, I think Jill has noted that the existing regulatory framework is sort of a little bit unwieldy in these areas and is less than ideal. So I think you could do it, but I don't think that's maybe the best option for the community, but you can do it. The other option is to do an RPS project only looking at the southwest side. The next option would be a UGB evaluation that is, and so the southwest side is Charleston and Barview, and then also look just at the Bunker Hill Bay Park area. Those are the three areas that already have sewer, they have water, and they're developed to substantially urban densities. The other option would be to do a UGB evaluation of all three of those areas, and all are a selection of the exception areas that are kind of near those, which would be Millington and Millington, Blossom Gulch, Libby, and then the RR2 area, which is kind of the exception land hill that's in the middle, smack in the middle of all three of those areas. And then the last option, which was the consultant recommended option, would be to include, do an evaluation for UGB inclusion of the southwest side, the Bunker Hill Bay Park area, and then look at doing urban reserve for those exception areas of Millington, Libby, Blossom Gulch, and the R2 area. So these are the areas we're talking about. I think everybody in this room is familiar, probably more familiar with me than I am, certainly more familiar than I am. The Southwest, like I said, those areas are both urban unincorporated communities. They're both served by Charleston Sanitary District and Charleston Fire District, and they're developed to urban intensities already at this point. The next area is the Southeast area. So this is where you get into some choices. And I think it's important to note that really the Southwest and the Southeast are sort of, as a policy matter, kind of functionally not connected to each other. The water board serves both areas, but there's two sewer treatment plants and different service districts. So essentially, they're not tied to each other in the way they might be in a lot of other communities. I mean, you can make a choice about one and then not do something with the other one, and it doesn't really affect your overall system or planning going forward. So this is the area where there really are policy choices. So the first one would be just to include, or the piece to the north is the Bunker Hill Bay Park. That's your urban unincorporated community in that area. Millington is the rural community area, that's in red. And it's a rural community in part because it doesn't have sewer. So that's kind of the big cutoff between urban unincorporated community and rural community. Millington doesn't have sewer. Bunker Hill area is served by the Bunker Hill Sanitary District. Some areas are not in fire district here. Others are within the Bunker Hill Fire District. And then the Isthmus Slough is in the Millington Fire District, and the Coal Bank Slough area is in the Livingston Fire District. So I will say, doing analysis kind of all around the state, that's about as many fire districts as I've ever seen in an area of that size for whatever. You guys are probably more familiar with me in the history of how that occurred. But and then lastly, these are still pretty much all developed to urban densities. The other two, it is an area that does have a few larger parcels that don't have development on them. On average, it's still about 1 unit per 2 acres in that area, but it's not. But it has some pieces that are, 6, 8, 10, 12 acres that are not, that either have no houses or only one house. So I'm just going to kind of quickly go through the different advantages and disadvantages of the policy options. Maintaining the existing regulations, it has the advantage of it's not a lot of work on the front end because you're not changing anything. I think the disadvantages are that land uses and facility planning, they're mostly limited to the existing zoning designations. That's the way that unincorporated communities really works. You can't really upzone for more intensive zoning to allow more houses and stuff like that, especially beyond what the facilities are sort of already designed to handle. So something like a significant capacity increase to a sewer pump station and a main line, that's going to be a problem under the unincorporated communities rule. The other thing is since it's outside the UGB, if property owners want to annex, if you're in the UGB, you don't have to annex. But if if some of those lands are added to the UGB and you have property owners that do want to annex, then if they're in the UGB, they would be able to. And there are reasons sometimes property owners want to be able to annex to a city. And then fully updating all the plans and associated agreements, will take time and some work to actually implement the RPS project. So it's sort of the counter to, it's the other side of the coin to not a lot of work. I think I maybe talked to the Board of Commissioners about this briefly last time. As far as on the annexation issue, you definitely don't have to annex just because you're in the UGB. But an example, the RPS project that happened in Jackson County, there was this kind of highly developed area between Medford and Phoenix. If you're familiar with Medford at all, highly developed. Back when the original UGBs were established, the county wanted one of the cities to take it, either Phoenix or Medford. They both refused to take it because it was going to be difficult to redevelop, right, or to support development, serve those areas. So it was a squabble at the original UGB establishments and between the county and those two cities. Ultimately, they wanted to get the UGBs done, so they said, "Okay, fine, neither of you has to include this. But we're going to put a policy in the county's comprehensive plan that the next time one of you does a UGB amendment, you're going to need to look at including this area." Okay. So fast forward, they get to the RPS project, that policy's still in there. The county says, "Hey, we haven't changed our mind about that." Again, there was some tug of war back and forth, and ultimately Phoenix said, "Okay, we'll put that in our urban reserve to maybe one day include in UGB." Well, that was an area that was significantly damaged by the Alameda fire, and they had a water service district in that location, the Charlotte Ann Water District. Literally, like the pipes and the pump station just turned into goo, melted into just a blob. Well, at that point, when it was put in as RPS, no, still don't think anybody would want to annex that area because they were like, "Hey, my taxes would go up. I don't want to, there's not a lot of benefit to me. I'll just stay in the county." And that was really what all the planners thought, right up until most of it burned to the ground. Then all of a sudden, between police services and the need to have the city basically apply for a grant to get new water lines and take over all the water distribution in that area, the idea of annexation became a lot more popular, and the city basically annexed all that area, and everybody seemed just fine with it. So it's just an instance of where some advanced planning, sometimes things, of course, it was a horrible thing, right? I mean, I lived through it. It was I had to pack up all my stuff, and luckily my house didn't burn, but it was a horrible thing. But because of the advanced planning that was done, it gave them a lot more options to respond a lot quicker to that pretty devastating situation. Okay, so the southwest side, talked about that. There is an opportunity over there to increase land use efficiencies to some extent. Charleston and Barbie, like I said, that area is largely independent of the choices on the southeast side because they're served especially by different water treatment plants. It's probably the easiest evaluation to defend from a regional problem solving standpoint because it's kind of the most intensively developed of the areas. Future facility planning is a little less effort, maybe just because then you're really just planning one area that's largely independent. And DLC feedback on that has been supportive. The main disadvantage is because it's so developed, there's not a lot of developable land in there. So, barring something that nobody would ever want to have actually happen, the pace of redevelopment would likely be relatively slow in those areas because the areas are largely already developed. So other option would be to do southwest for UGB evaluation, southwest side plus Bunker Hill, and then pretty similar advantages and disadvantages because again, it's largely urbanized and it's already in an urban unincorporated community. So the other option would be to include all those areas and then do a evaluation to include also the exception areas and evaluate whether to include Libby, Blossom Gulch, Millington, R2 area. That's the one that would add the most buildable land, but it also is the one that would require the most flexibility under the rules. So I think there's definitely a little more risk that DLCD would not be supportive of that. The other issue is there is buildable land, but there's a lot of topography there. It is still fairly partialized. And it's important to understand when it comes to facilities, there's a big difference between versus being in an urban reserve. So an urban reserve is really just an area that in the future, if through the standard process, the city of Coos Bay, if it starts growing and population forecasts are saying, hey, this area is growing, you do your buildable lands inventory and go, oh, we need more land. And then you're following the standard process, then urban reserve is the first priority. It's not good to think of it as automatic in terms of UGB inclusion. You still have to go through the process. But the number of properties and the planning effort required for a standard UGB, if you have urban reserves versus not having urban reserves, having done a number of these in the state, I mean, it's probably like, it's probably 25% of the work comparatively in this instance, because there's also still a lot of exception areas around Coos Bay, like on the Isthmus Heights and that. The way the study area works, you'd have to include all those and you have to analyze them like property by property to decide what to include and not to include. It's definitely a heavier lift. But so that's one thing urban reserve does. The other thing urban reserve does is you don't, if it's you do your facilities planning, so water, sewer, and transportation primarily, you have to, if it's in sort of making a commitment that you're going to figure out how to serve those areas. Well, some of those areas are going to be pretty challenging, right? And sort of it's in UGB to some extent, like the clock's ticking to get it figured out. And those are some expensive things to figure out and expensive to do facility planning and then even more expensive to deliver the services, right? So whereas the urban reserve doesn't have that same level of commitment, really, you have an urban reserve when you do your facility planning, you're going to make some assumptions about some future development out in that area. So then if you have a major upgrade, like a sewer main that you're replacing, you're gonna think about, okay, well, what's the marginal, and you don't have to necessarily put in a bigger main, but you might think about, okay, well, what's the marginal cost if you're the city of Coos Bay to go to, to a 21-inch line from an 18-inch line? It's not that much. Turns out most of the cost is mobilization and digging the hole. The little bit of additional pipe cost, not that big of a deal. With 21, we could, if this area ever comes into the UGB, we could serve that whole area. Okay, that sort of makes sense, but you're not necessarily committed to doing that, and also gives the city the option of being like, well, we just don't have the money, so we'll figure it out later, right? So there's a lot more flexibility, I think, with the urban reserve, and it doesn't create that same sort of commitment. Disadvantages with including it is really that is you are committing to doing those facility plans. So this is kind of the other option, which is what the Planning Commission recommended, which is to do UGB, an RPS project, to do UGB evaluation for the southwest side, the Bunker Hill area, and then look at doing the exception areas as urban reserve, because they don't come with the same level of commitments, but they do create a format for the city to think about their facility planning for those areas. The other things is in an urban reserve, there's an urban reserve management agreement between the county and the city for those areas. Typically, the way, I mean, it's a negotiated thing, but typically the way that works is that property owners still have the density that they're allowed to develop to, for example, in the rural area that they currently have. But for bigger parcels, you might have some design standards for clustering, right? So most like the R2 area, as example, allows, just like it sounds, 1 unit per 2 acres, right? Well, some of those pieces in the R2 area, like some of them are like maybe 8 to 10 acres, and some of them have some flat, like there's some future development potential there. So then it might be that the urban reserve agreement, if somebody has 10 acres, they can still do 5 houses, right? But there's some design standards that they'll be clustered on, maybe 1/4 acre lots or 1/3 acre lots, and then have a sewer easement on the remainder of the property so that they can each have their septic systems. But then in the future, if that area ever comes into the UGB and can be developed further, then you tear out the sewer system, you connect, or the septic system, you connect sewer, and you have whatever that is, 7.5 acres left on a 10-acre piece to develop. So those are the kinds of things that can be put in an urban reserve. So you're looking forward a little bit to what would happen if this area develops, if it develops more intensively in the future. I would say, as part of this project, we did look at kind of, and we do a lot of development permitting, like straight up getting subdivisions approved and all that kind of stuff. So we look at, that's a big chunk of our company's work, is not doing work for the government, but doing work for the private sector and trying to get things approved. And looking at kind of all the developable land in Coos Bay, other than that area and the other two, there's developable land that isn't either owned by the state, that like the Crown Point would be very developable land, but the state bought that for conservation reasons. And then the tribe owns kind of the other land that's above Barview, that it kind of goes up, and then there's a shelf and some different flat areas up there. Beyond those areas, and not that other 2 areas flat, but it has areas that are, I think, developable. So that would be the reason for doing urban reserve.
If I could just take a pause for a moment, maybe some clarification or some clarity, because we were just talking about fire, sewer, and water. Is there some clarity that you can provide maybe on our IGAs?
And maybe this has already been discussed in some of the other meetings that's either happened at the county or here, but just so we kind of are on the same playing field. I do recognize that Millington and Bunker Hill and Charleston all exist as fire districts, as well as the 2 sewer plants and the 2 sewer districts. However, other than Millington, the city provides those services for those sewer districts through our plants, through an IGA. And then I guess I should also clarify Charleston and Millington. The city does provide fire services for both Bunker Hill and Libby. So there is some already city services that are being provided through an IGA that might maybe make some of those decisions different if you knew that.
So like the Libby Fire District is actually doesn't have any functioning capacity. It's just done. It's just a tax district.
Fully formed and have
They
equipment.
don't have a building equipment and all that. Yeah, they're do. Those are the agreements.
You know,
Right.
contract with the city of Coos
Sure.
Bay.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon in that happens. Thank you. I didn't actually know that. I looked them up. What I noticed is they didn't have any website or anything where I could find anything about them. That would be why. So mystery solved. I appreciate that. Yeah, and that's not uncommon. That's an example of sort of what happens, right, when a district isn't really able to sustain itself as an independent entity because it just doesn't have enough tax base to support it. So key considerations, sort of selection of any of the policy options except maintaining is a decision at this point to move forward with an RPS project of some type. The actual RPS project is when the specific decisions of what to include happens. This is really deciding to evaluate them, right? So later there's a whole secondary land use process where then the picking of lands and at that stage too, even if there are areas, right, that that the city is interested in including. I mean, that's when you really start getting into property by property, looking at, exactly where the line is on the map on a property basis and comparing that to the county's, the county's urban communities boundary and deciding exactly which properties to come in or not, even if a broad area, for example, you decide to include it. So Chelsea already mentioned the joint PC work session. There was consensus to look at including the Bunker Hill, Bay Park, Charleston, and Barview for UGB evaluation. Again, not included. They would just be in the agreement. These are the areas we're going to look at including for UGB, and then those other areas for potentially urban reserve. I think it's important that, as far as getting direction, there really is no answer. It's like there's trade-offs to all of them, and it's really is. That's why it's a policy choice. It's your guys', this is your county, this is your town. It's not for me as the consultant to say what makes sense for, for your county and your town. It is important though to get some direction tonight to sort of wrap the project up because there's parts of tech memos 3, 4, and 5 that need to be refined based upon the direction that we get, right? So that like the work plan in 5 changes if it's like, no, we really only want to do the southwest area, well then the work plan is a little bit simpler because you're really just looking at that area and there isn't any urban reserves. It's not a difficult thing to make those adjustments, and that's kind of baked into the cake, but will need to be done. And as far as the actual problem statement, which these are all things that you have to put in the agreement, you have to do a problem statement, you have to have goals and objectives, you have to have RPS actions, RPS incentives and disincentives, and then corrective actions. My disclaimer that I've been putting on this since the start of the project is the problem statement and the goal and objectives, those are pretty standard planning terms. Actions maybe a little bit. RPS is the only thing in Oregon planning that has incentives and disincentives and corrective actions. So your guess is as good as mine exactly what that's supposed to mean. But in Tech Memos 3 and 4, we framed up what we think makes sense for those type of elements to be in an agreement. That was something that was the main focus of the project advisory committee today, was to go through those and got some good feedback. We're going to make a few adjustments, but that was the main focus, was to go through the specific language of those items, assuming the council and the board are in agreement to move forward with an RPS project. So.
All right.
I already mentioned the next steps.
Thank you very much.
And I'm happy to answer any questions.
I would open it up for questions or comments at this time. We're, Mayor Benetti or Counselor Matthews, can you do a test for us to see?
Test, test. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? No? Bummer.
Wait, I got you.
Oh, you can hear us.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I don't think they can hear us in the room though.
I didn't know I was I didn't
That's
even
okay.
know I was I thought I was muted this whole time.
Yeah, no worries. Well,
Well, yeah.
unfortunately, they're having technical issues, so we don't have the ability to comment unless we use the chat, which you're using, so that's good.
Very cool. Well, good to see you virtually.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for your comments.
Yeah, I guess I can turn on the Here we go.
Yeah, it doesn't even look like we're getting video feed from the council chambers at this point.
Oh man, oh man. Well, okay. Well, I don't have any questions. I was just checking it out anyways. So,
All right. Well, thank you.
of course, thank you.
Thanks.
Where do you live, Caleb, real quick?
Oh, I have a property in Bunker Hill. Actually, like it's a vacant lot up there, up on the hill. So
Okay.
that's why I have an interest in this. But right now, I am living in San Francisco. But I still come back for the summers. Like I'm coming back this week, coming back in another month, and hopefully gonna develop the property. But I know. I mean, from what sounds of it, this will maybe reduce the hurdles, as far as you know, to make it more developable.
Yep. Okay.
Caleb, it's going to take a few years to go through this process. So I can tell you that. I imagine anywhere from 4 to 6 years under the way it is right now. The city and the county do not fund that it takes to develop this and go through the process. And we got to get it from the state. So that's the only way that we can get the funding. And the funding is going to dictate how this moves forward. So.
Got
Unfortunately.
you. Thank you. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, uh, yeah, I'll be patient anyhow, but, but thanks.
Carmen, as far as the visual coming through YouTube, you just see the back end being done. So nothing's happening.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I wasn't looking at the YouTube channel. I'm just looking here. Oh, looks like
Sort of. It was about $600,000, and Jennifer thought it was light.
Just because constituents will ask these things. And I think we already heard the answer before, but if the UGB expands, that does not impose city taxes on the new UGB unless city limits expand, correct?
It is not.
And the city codes won't apply in the UGB unless the city expands, right?
That's correct, unless as there would be post UGB or as part of the UGB, there will be the urban growth area. So unless the county said, we want the city zoning, we're going to adopt the city zoning for the county area, which some places have done, but I would say it's rare.
Okay.
Most communities do not choose to adopt the city's zoning code for the county area.
And there would be a process for that usually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it needs to be, but let's put it this way. Happen is at least 2 or 3 of you think it's a good idea and the city thinks it's a good idea. That's right.
Can you all hear us?
We're still working to get you into the meeting, Mayor Benetti and Councilor Matthews. My apologies. If you do want to put anything in the chat, I can do that. Did you have any questions or comments? Yet. I'm getting ready to tap dance here. Did you have anything, Commissioner Taylor?
Well, thank you, Counselor. I think that the city is not in a terribly different sort of a fiscal, not a much greater fiscal position than the county is. They don't have money to now they're gone. It's hard to put everything in the chat that we might be asking anyway. Like for instance,
Yeah,
do they have to change the lines, zoning laws, for the county for the whole county, or can it be a portion? Because if we could do a portion, that would be make it better for the county and us and more density. But
yeah,
I don't know that we'll have to wait and see.
yeah. I'm trying to understand all of this.
So unfortunately, when this was adopted in 1980 by the state, supposedly it wasn't, even though the LCD adopted the urban growth boundaries that was submitted because it was mandated. So I learned all this today. So anyway, when they did that in 1999 and 2000, they went through a periodic review, and the city and the county, for whatever reason, decided that to fix it, to adopt these and put them in the urban growth boundary, didn't feel it was necessary. And by not doing that, it put us in a position that we just couldn't move forward with the urban growth boundary that we established already. So now we're having to go through this issue. The big thing is, I asked him, I said, if we had $600,000, could we get this done in how fast? And he goes, 9 months. But if we don't have the money, it's immaterial. And as Rod Taylor was saying, he's right. It's 650,000. It's going to take, Way was talking about, we're not going to get any money this biennium. We'll probably have to wait 2 more years to get maybe. And then, so I don't know, or even maybe 4 years, 2 different sessions to get the money. So,
And your focused goal on this is to increase density within those areas, or what is the goal that you see?
establishing an area, and I'm only looking at, now they're talking about all the areas, which that's fine. But we need to be careful as a city because we need to have the tax revenue coming in to justify police and fire and all the other things. So my intent would be that we have urban growth boundary from our city limits and out to Charleston, Barfield. That's it. And then what it does, it just sets up Stephanie's calling. This is interesting. Hey, Stephanie. Stephanie. I think it's a misdial. So anyway, all it does is to set up the city for the future to develop into this. Stephanie? Stephanie?
Pocket dial.
So what it does is it sets up that boundary. And then any future city council or this city in general wants to expand, say they need to expand, then they can expand. And you're not going to ever do the whole thing. You would do proportionally a smaller amount, maybe go to, I don't know, a couple blocks towards, Empire Boulevard out towards Charleston and figure out what's going to be beneficial. And there's supposedly some platted lots out there, according to Jill, that you could build on right away. And the way that does, it allows more density because in the city limits, you can build apartment complexes and housing developments. In the county, you can. I think it's one house for every 2 acres or something. And so you can't get the density. And so beneficial for all of us if we can do that. But they have to agree to be annexed in also, Carmen. So you can't just go in there and say, okay, we're taking you, because that's not going to work, right?
Oh, so if we do that, we still have to rely on the property owners being okay with it.
Yes.
Wow, okay.
Well,
And
it just sets up the potential, that's all.
yeah, but I mean, it does hopefully increase their access to services that the city has as opposed to the county.
Yeah, so what we have going for us now, right now, when you do these urban growth boundaries, you have to show that you have sewer, which we do out there in Charleston.
Yep.
And we have fire, you have the Charleston Fire District, so
Mhm.
that's there. And so what we would bring to the table, because they're already paying that and they're paying the sewer and water, is police services.
Mhm.
And so what that would do, which they're not getting right now from the county. So it would be that type of thing. And then more public works, we would offer more public works, sidewalks and streets and repairs and that kind of stuff where, yes, exactly. Where, you can go in with a development and say, okay, like they're doing at Timber Cove, you got to put sidewalks in, you got to put streets in, you do that kind of thing. So we can get there. And, for us, I'd like to get that RV park, and I'm not sure, I think it might be a little bit far out for the first to reach. Or maybe if we did it that way, because that facility would generate a lot of income for us. I don't know what's
But
going on.
right now,
Can you hear us? I don't know.
right now, why would the county want to let that go?
Well, they could, but well, first of all,
They'll still pay county taxes.
I'm gonna put you on speakerphone.
okay, I got Carmen here too.
Areas that are in.
Yeah, hold on just a minute.
So, because they generate already the taxes, and if we can develop it like a housing development, they would get more taxes.
Okay, I have Mayor Benetti and Councilor Matthews on my phone. We're going kind of not new tech, but a little bit techy here. Can you hear? Go ahead and do a test, and we'll see if we can hear you.
Test 1, 2. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, Carmen's turn.
Testing, can you hear me through all of these layers?
Yes, we can.
All right.
Wow. All right.
Okay, so who wants to go first?
You got any questions, Carmen?
Not at this moment. I'm kind of getting the rundown from Mayor Benetti, so it's good.
So it was asked, I think, by Drew, and then Jay answered that we could change the land use situation to that would create more density that could be built. But it was probably suggested by Jay that that's not usually the way to go. My question is, if that was to be the case, you have to do the whole county, or can you just do a portion?
No, you could do.
Things and to clarify, I think the question was, would the county adopt the city's regulations? And I think that's rare, but it may well be, and this would be more common, where the city says, okay, this is now in the urban growth boundary. We're gonna make some adjustments to our zoning code that allows for more intensive development. Jill, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, so we would look at what would be consistent. So we weren't creating non-conforming uses when they're brought in. And so that would go through a plan amendment process. And we would definitely take into consideration about what the intensive of the uses could be versus what we allow right now to make sure that we're consistent.
Yeah, so it's more of like the density and development. some development standards that would be in the county's code rather than a wholesale administration of the city's code in the and adoption of the city's code in that rural area. Usually that's the happy medium of these kind of agreements where people land, because then you're not asking the county to essentially administrate both a city code and a county code. If it's only for one city, that's not too bad. But then you'll have other cities with other urban growth boundaries, and the next thing you know, Joe wakes up and she has 7 codes to administer, and that's usually why that's not done, or 8, or however many you could end up with.
I was just gonna ask if this means that we would zone, if we could zone southwest into the southeast, because Coos County already has a city that's got a UGB that exceeds its city limits, Bandon, the Sunset City, right? That one, Sunset City outside Bandon is in their UGB, but it's not in the city limits. So if we change something for Charleston, does that change all of the things in the UGBs?
No, not unless you wanted it to.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Joe would be paying attention to that and make sure that didn't happen accidentally. Yeah, that's right.
For this process. And so earlier today, I asked, how does it proceed with the funding? And it doesn't proceed until we have the funders.
Right.
I remember the question. Summarizing the mayor's question earlier today, which was, that was his question, right? Which is like, if it's in UGB, like, like, are you on the hook for it immediately, sort of, and, like, would you be on the hook for both sides, southwest side and southeast side at once? The answer to that question is if it's in UGB, like, to have a plan sort of to get to it, right? But it's always going to be as funding allows. Like that's just how that world works. Basically, right up until the point DEQ or Department of Health, and that's the water roads problem. So you got the city of the county need to worry about that part, right? But on the sewer side, right up till the point where DEQ starts knocking on your door and says, hey, like you need to update your facility master plan. But usually a lot of steps happen. And a lot of times too, then DEQ starts being the one to start looking for money pretty actively because they don't like sewer systems that are not in compliance with their regulations. They really don't. It's Gold Hill. It's all right. It's just gone straight in the road. There's no.
So spurring off, just to make sure I'm still tracking, is the core question tonight southwest or southeast or both?
I think the core question is southwest, or the southeast, or both, and then do you want to look at doing the urban reserves for those sort of areas, the exception areas?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking on it because I asked Wade questions earlier about how long the process takes. And it sounds like from what you're saying, southwest is the easiest. If we conflate these two, southwest, southeast, it makes it a little more precarious moving forward. And with the duration it's going to take, that's where I get a little torn, because if it takes, was it 4 years or something until the end? The study is quicker than that, but.
The facility master plan.
Probably it's UGB piece. I think the study is a year or 2 years.
The mayor asked that question earlier. I would say like the fastest reasonable you could go will probably be about 9 months.
Okay.
And and it might take as long as a year and a half, including both those areas. Does it have a lot more work or take a lot more time? I think so. Originally, so that depends if one neighborhood is really against it and the other is really, but that's also then when the politics come into play, and at any point you can go, heard your comments and we're not going to include those, and And then that decision gets made and then you go on about your way. So,
After the study is done in the 9 months, if it's that
Yeah.
quick, when do we know if it worked or not? If there's a risk with the southwest and southeast,
so, so that part happens pretty quick because you send it up to the state and I think you have 120 days to do stuff for it. Is that right? I think so. Yeah. So yeah, it's 100. It doesn't change the state's review time.
okay,
Is the answer.
I'm just playing with things because
Right.
I was on council. I remember the housing needs analysis in 2020, and if this thing takes 5 or 6 years, it's gonna be halfway through a 20-year housing needs analysis before something happens.
Too busy to, like let it take that long. You might want to find another consultant who wants to go slower, but it's you'll have it take that long. It's that simple. Too many other angry clients.
I just want to sort of lay out the timeline that we're talking about right now. Where are we going from here? So tonight we're hoping to have a decision of which direction you want to go. Because the funding we're currently under, it's a biennial funding cycle, which ends at the end of June. And so to tee up for the next phase of the RPS, Regional Problem Solving Project, we will want to apply when the next biennium funding comes around again, which in a few months.
So yes, September, October-ish timeframe, is that right?
I just want to remind you all why we kind of started down this pathway. So we had a project where somebody actually wanted to develop their land, and we reached out to the city for comments because DEQ stepped in and said, you're within 500 feet of a sewer connection. And we looked at all of our agreements and we said, yeah, the city should be able to extend that service. And the city said, no, that's not what our agreement says. They're right, we're right. Our agreements do not align. And so we left this poor applicant in limbo for like 4 months trying to figure this out.
Having been there, that's worse than being told no. It's the head versus 3 in the chest type game as an applicant.
So if we do nothing else but just fix these agreements to say, this is what we're going to do, I would really appreciate that.
And if I could just add more about the timeline, I think of that detail that's really interesting of how, we're doing this. Is so once we get the funding for this biennium, so 2025, 2027, then we'll work to present the work plan, which is currently draft, tech memo number 5, to LCDC, Land Conservation Development Commission. And then they will need to approve the work plan. And that's when that 4-year timeline starts. So it's 4, yeah.
3. For us, 3.
Okay, well, he's doing the work, so he's got.
Such a lot lately. It's 3. Full disclosure, Jackson County took 12 years. So that's the legislature was like, we're going to put a cap on this.
Right, so which means DLCD is prepared to fund this work for the next 2 biennia because it may take that long. So I just want to lay that out. Thanks.
Any other? Oh, go ahead.
Jill, I want to make sure I understood what you just said. I thought what I heard you say was that the easiest thing to do would be just to simply make sure that what we currently have it meshes.
You would like to say that it was simple. I thought maybe it was simple, but it's really not. We have to go through a process in order to do it. And so that's why all this got drug in. So we started examining what happened when, how we didn't communicate in the past. That's unfortunate. We can't go back to the 90s and fix it, but we have to fix it now.
So what you're saying then is because we have to fix some of these things because we don't want to leave somebody in limbo like that, we might as well take a look at these other things and get it in line.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Another question is that I don't know enough about these areas that we've identified relative to buildability, relative to the cost of delivering the water, sewage. I guess you don't deliver sewage, you take it away. You know, I don't want to say I want to, I want to do southeast, but to me, that land is either really rugged and hard to build on and harder yet to build roads on and harder yet to get water to places and
Right.
sewage away. So is anyone ever going to use it if we go through the process of, I mean, I can see a home here and there, they're all over the place, but.
So this will result in a new housing study ultimately, because both Coos Bay's housing study and Coos County's housing study probably identified properties that really are not buildable. And so now we have these lands that are identified. And when people come to us and say, yeah, I can't build here, we don't really have a way to say, okay, we're gonna take that out and put it in without doing a new housing study. We can't do that without the feasibility of, you know, what's in an urban growth boundary versus what's not an urban growth boundary. We included these lands in our housing study, whether that was right or wrong, because we considered them urban. They're not necessarily because they're urban unincorporated communities, but I think that the answer is when we get through this, we're gonna have to both do new housing studies and it will show you what is actually buildable and what's not buildable.
And the thing I would add to that is that's actually the nice part about like the middle ground with the urban reserve. The analysis for those areas under the standard process, because that's how they would actually come in. You analyze them in the standard process is excruciating detail to decide which properties to meet your land need. So the other ones, which are a little bit less complex because they're already served with sewer, the lands to be evaluated for UGB inclusion, they're already evaluated, they're already served by sewer, they're already served by water, they're already developed to a significant extent. Like on some level, like what does it cost to serve sewer for Charleston Bayou? What the budget for the Charleston Bayou Sanitary District, and that's what it costs. Right now, what it will cost in the future, you know, that this policy choice might change that a little bit, but you're talking 10% or 15%, something like that, right? It's not orders of magnitude different.
So Jay, let me ask you one quick question. The next step would actually be to the study to determine whether these are actually appropriate.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, yep, that's the part, right? Was it right? For example, one of the ones that you know that was Libby. Like, I think it makes sense to look at that as an urban area, but I can tell you that particular one, the parts that aren't developed are canyons. So it might be like, hey, we looked at this and it just doesn't make sense for that area to be urban reserve. As a matter of fact, we would rather have it urban reserve. So when and if Coos Bay does a standard UGB amendment, that's not included in the priority land base, and you don't have to analyze 150 lots and tell us what we all already know because we live here. There's no more land that you can build on there, right? It's like that kind of a thing.
And Jay, is it fair to say that, so we have a planning problem with these areas. They don't fit nicely in the current statute, the box. And so if we were to leave any one of them on the table now and not evaluate them, we're still left with a planning problem. And so to look at them, all of them, either through UGB or urban reserve, at least gets us to a point where we've cleaned up the planning problem and we have a clean slate and we're all playing, the same box, the state, the county, the city, moving forward. So it makes it easier for both staff and the citizen, moving forward. So that's the reason why, while it might seem like, let's just do Charleston, that's easy, that's fast, I don't think it really is any quicker. I don't think it solves really all the problems. So you want to kind of make sure you're considering it holistically in those terms.
As an example, right? Like if out the other end, the board and the city are like, let's not include that in urban reserve for those reasons. That's actually a nice, clear endpoint for Jill administering the county's code, that it's like, you're a rural residential area no different than a rural residential area that is on the way to Powers or wherever your other urban, or outside between Coquille, it's just the same, right? And that having slugged my way through those regulations at this point, not as much as she has, like at the counter, that would be a nicer, easier thing to be able to tell those property owners. There was a process. This is what got decided. This is what you are. And this is the part of the code that applies to you, if that makes sense, or to your property.
Right, it gives our property owners and our clients more certainty.
Yeah, because right now what they would do is go and pull up the urban growth management agreement that is signed by both the city and the county from 1982 and say, what does this line on the map mean? And she does not have a good answer to that. Nor do I. I have no idea what what I know is it does not mean urban growth boundary, even though the legend says UGB area.
So doing all the zones at once sounds like the way to go, at least in my head.
For this step, but it's only this step.
In UGB and urban reserve. Like if we say, if I were to go for all, do I specify UGB or urban reserve and remind me?
Yes, yeah, that's definitely the direction we would want. And it's a big distinction, right? So touched on this a little bit earlier. So the reserve, essentially that's an area going, whenever Coos Bay grows and needs more land under the standard process, this is the area that gets analyzed first and the land gets picked from, right? That's the purpose of an urban reserve. And then there's also an agreement between the city and the county that usually applies some specific development standards to those areas to sort of, it's really for the bigger parcels, to kind of leave some developable land so you don't get a bunch of 2.5 acre parcels with the houses right smack in the middle of the lots, right? So that's all urban reserve does. At that point, you're done with urban reserve. You don't have to think about it anymore. You have to do anything until an actual UGB comes forward. And we're very glad that you have an urban reserve.
Sounds like the way to go. Do you have a preference? You know these things.
I have a preference probably to take the recommendation that the Consolidated Planning Commission's made, which was to do the UGB for the 3 areas and the rest of them are 3. Yeah.
Which I consolidated. Which wasn't fair. I consolidated Charleston and Parkview just because they're on the other side of the hill and have the same sewer district. But
and then the rest of it.
I'm not going to go to Parkview and tell them they're in Charleston and not land me in a fight.
Okay, so Southwest, UGB, Southeast, Reserve. That's what I gathered there.
You concur with that, Chelsea?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, Bunker Hill.
Yes, that's right.
Charleston,
Yeah.
and Parkview, and then Blossom Gulch, Libby, Millington, and the piece in between would be reserve.
Evaluated for reserve.
Right.
And almost a very simple way to think about it is we would look at evaluating the UGB for the areas that are already served by sewer and look at those other areas as a potential urban reserve. Done.
Right.
And do we need a motion around that?
Say it again more slowly.
I'm gonna pause for a second and go back to my phone and have the mayor and councilor, if they have any comments.
Well, Mr. Chair, I agree with what you said, Jill, and Celsius, with that. Just with this, we have the 3 different areas, and the other urban reserve, excuse me.
Councilor Matthews? Giving us the thumbs up. All right, any other comments, consensus here from the dais?
I'm just laughing because one of these just says RR2.
Yeah.
You got Libby, Millington, and then,
That's the space in.
yeah, that doesn't get a name.
It's the only area in Coos County that doesn't have a name. I still don't have a name. It's like that's what they can't believe they didn't come up with a name.
They might have one, we just don't know it.
Find out the hearing, right? Like I just this so like that. That's right.
Kind of like that. Did you have anything, Jacob?
No.
Anyone else? Sounds like you have consensus.
That's, I think, really all we need. Yeah, very good. So, the next steps then would be to finalize the tech memos 3, 4, and 5 around this consensus so that they're consistent. And then we've already started drafting up the agreement for this project. Cable Houston out of Portland is the consulting attorney. Tommy Brooks is the managing partner there, and he's the one who's on the project. I think he's one of the best land use attorneys in the state. We work with him. We work with the best land use attorneys in the state, and he's certainly one of them. And so he's already got me a draft, and based upon this, I'm gonna incorporate some stuff and then send it back to him. So you actually will probably see a draft in your inbox here pretty quickly in the coming weeks.
Well, thank you for taking such a complex thing and breaking it down.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate the time. It's kind of, these are the fun projects, I guess. And the weird planner type 2 fun or whatever. But I don't know if it's a party though. So I'm gonna miss the party. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right. Then that was the only action item that we had to discuss. If there's anything else to come before either of these bodies, then I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting.